Today we're going to talk a little bit about congruent triangles and work with them a little, practice working with them a little bit. So today's lesson is going to be a little bit of a shorter lesson. It's also going to be important though because it's going to set us up for some things that we're going to need to know about heading into what we're going to talk about for the rest of the week in the next lesson. So first of all, what are congruent figures? So we already know from angles that congruent means they're the same, but we're going to expand that definition a little bit and say if we're talking about congruent shapes instead of congruent angles, that means that they are the same size. So if we're talking about congruent triangles, they should be the same size of triangle and the same shape of triangle. So by shape, we mean basically the same classification of triangles. So like a right triangle is not the same shape as an equilateral triangle. Those are two different types of triangles. So they have to be the same shape. So basically they look the same. If we have congruent figures, we can match up the parts of those figures. So we can take a part off of one figure and find what the same part would be in the other figure. So those matching parts are called corresponding parts. And corresponding is just another word for matching. It's what corresponding means. So when we're naming corresponding parts, this is very important, and you're going to see what I mean by this when we look at an example in just a second. But corresponding parts are named in matching order. So you'll see what I mean about matching order in just a minute. So what you should be able to do today is two things. First of all, you should be able to look at two shapes and tell me if they are congruent. And we already know that we could start by looking and seeing, are they the same size, are they the same shape? We're going to talk more about what you can look for in just a minute. And then the other thing that you should be able to do is list out all the corresponding parts. So we're going to actually practice doing that right now with an example problem. So we have two triangles. So these triangles are congruent triangles. And you're going to add some labels into this triangle. So everything that I'm writing down on the triangles or next to the triangles, you should be writing down on your page. So we're going to start by just giving these triangles a name. So we're going to go A, B, C, D, E, F. Very creative, right? But now we've got all the corners and the angles named, so it's going to make it easier to talk about things. Now, there are a couple of different ways that we can name things. So let's talk about how to label corresponding parts or matching parts. So if I have corresponding angles, I can label corresponding angles with matching arc marks. So angle B is kind of this top pointy angle. Same angle in the other triangle will be angle E. So if I put an arc mark for angle B, I should put a matching arc mark for angle E, and that tells me those are matching angles. Now, I could do that for the next pair of angles. So I come over here to angle C, but I don't want to use one arc mark because that would mean that C and A or C and B are the same size, but they're not. So what I can do instead to say this is a new pair of angles is I can use two arc marks. So what matches with angle C is angle D. So if I put two arc marks on angle C, I would also want to put two arc marks on angle D. So matching arc marks go with matching parts, matching angles, corresponding angles. So that's one way that you can label things, corresponding parts on figures. So use arc marks to label corresponding angles. Now, I can match up the angles. I can also match up the sides, but I can't put an arc mark on a side. Oh, actually, before we do that, we have two more angles. And this actually is, it's not labeled, but this would be the one exception to using arc marks is if you have a right angle. So if I put a right angle mark here and a right angle mark here, right angle matches right angle. So right angle symbol, when you're working with congruent figures, kind of functions the same as an arc mark. They're matching marks that uniquely identify those angles. Now, the sides. I can't put arc marks on the sides very well. So what we do instead for the sides is we do what are called tick marks. So here's what tick marks look like. So I've got this kind of skinny side that runs between the right angle and the 2 arc angle. So I'm going to put a little tick mark across that side. And then I'm going to put a matching tick mark on the matching side of the other triangle. So the same side on the other triangle would also be down here. So it would be right there. So those are called tick marks. So you can use tick marks to label corresponding sides. So kind of like the arc marks, I can use 1 tick mark, I can use 2 tick marks. So like AB, I don't want to use 1 tick mark because that would mean that AB and AC are the same and they're not. So I can use 2 tick marks instead. So AB runs from the right angle up to the 1 tick mark angle. So the matching side on the other triangle would be FE over here. So I could put 2 tick marks to match the 2 tick mark side on the other triangle. So you can use different amounts of tick marks to show all the different pairs of angles that are that match up but are different from each other. And then we've got our hypotenuse, since these are right triangles. So hypotenuse matches hypotenuse. So I'm going to use 3 for that to tell the hypotenuse apart from the other sides. So that's how you can label actually on a triangle. So you should be able to read the labels on shapes to tell which sides are corresponding parts. You should also be able to list out corresponding parts. And this is where the our named and matching order part comes into play, where we're going to talk about that. So we're working with triangles. Naming the angles is pretty easy because I can just use a single letter name for the angle. Since there's only 1 angle in each corner, it's not going to get confused with anything. So I can go through and I can list out all of the corresponding angles, and that's pretty easy. So angle A, and since these are congruent shapes, are the same, we're going to use our congruent symbol that we talked about the other day. So angle A is congruent to angle F, so those go together. Angle B is congruent to angle E. Those go together. And angle C is congruent to angle D. So naming out the angles, not so bad. Where you have to pay attention to the matching order is with the sides. So the way we name a side, so when we're naming a side, we always have to use a 2-letter name. Basically say, where does the side start and where does the side stop? So that's what the 2 letters are. So this first side over here, if I wanted to look at that side, I could call that AB or I could call it BA. It doesn't really matter, but I need to name both of the endpoints. So I'm just going to say AB. And then kind of like how we have an angle symbol that we put in front of an angle name to say that we're talking about an angle, the notation that we use to talk about a side is a little bar over the top of it. So it's basically a little picture of a side. So that is what's called a segment symbol. A segment is another word for a side length. So you should be using angle symbols in front of your angle names. You should be using segment symbols over your side lengths. So AB, congruent. Now, here's where we get into the matching order part of this. So I'm going to, looking at this green side. So the first side that we named, out of the A and the B, we named the A first. So we started at the right angle, which means when we're naming the matching side, which is going to be right here, right? So we could call that EF or FE. We want to name it in the same order though. Since AB, we started by naming the right angle first. The other side, we also need to start by naming the right angle first. So that's what we mean by matching order. So AB is not congruent to EF. AB is congruent to FE. So order matters when you are naming congruent sides. And then we could keep going. So we've got AC, which is the bottom side. So again, I'm going from starting with the right angle and ending with the 2 arc angle. So I would do the same thing on the other side. Start with the right angle, end with the 2 arc angle, FD. And then the last one is BC. So BC, so I'm starting with the 1 arc and ending with the 2 arc angle. So I would want to start with the 1 arc angle and end with the 2 arc angle. Okay, so those are correctly named. So again, this first one, I could have said BA instead of AB, but if I said BA, I would also have to flip the other one around. So I could also say BA is congruent to EF. Just make sure you're keeping things in matching order. So that's how you name congruent sides and congruent angles. Now, we can also make a congruent statement about the overall shape as a whole. So we can make a congruency statement about the triangles. So if you're trying to check if two things are congruent, if we're saying they're the same shape and the same size, that means all of the sides should match up and all of the angles should match up. So every side and every angle should have a side and an angle and the other shape that is exactly the same size. So that's how you can check for congruent a little bit more formally. So you could say, okay, I have a side length that's 10. Do I have another side length that's 10 in the other shape? No? Okay, they're not congruent because they don't both have the same size. So that's one thing you're going to practice a little bit on your assignment, is just looking at a couple of shapes and looking and seeing, do all of the sides match up? Or do they all match up in congruent pairs? Are these shapes actually congruent? The other thing you're going to do is practice naming out the congruent angles and the congruent sides, kind of like this list that we just made next to your triangles. The last thing you're going to do is make a congruent statement. So if all the angles match up, they all did here, and all the sides match up, they did here, then that means we could say the shape as a whole is congruent. So we could say that overall these triangles are congruent. So you can make a congruency statement with those triangles. So kind of like how we have an angle symbol for angles and a segment symbol for side lengths, we also have a symbol for triangles. So when we're naming triangles, we use what looks like a little triangle symbol. So that is the symbol that means this is a triangle. So if I wanted to name triangle ABC, I would use a triangle symbol and then write ABC. And that tells me, okay, this is a triangle and its corners are A, B, and C. I can say that that's congruent to the other triangle. But again, we name things in matching orders. So whatever side matched, since I listed A first, whatever the matching angle is for A should also be listed first in this triangle. So A matches with F, which means I should name F first. And then I would keep going. So if I look at what I listed in the middle, B, I should find what matches with B, and that should also be in the middle in the other one. So that would be E. So that means this triangle is going to be FED. So triangle ABC is congruent to triangle FED. Again, keep things in matching orders. So that is your introduction to congruent triangles and a little bit about getting things matched up, and also a little bit about notation and how to correctly list out matching parts. So those are the things that you are going to be practicing on your assignment today when you're ready.